The war had lasted 60 years, and the galaxy was losing. Ambassador stood at the viewport of his diplomatic vessel and watched the blue marble of Earth grow larger against the darkness of space. He had traveled 4,000 light-years to reach this small world on the edge of explored space. His mission was simple but desperate. The Galactic Coalition needed soldiers, and they needed them now. The Dominion had consumed 12 species in the past century, entire civilizations reduced to ash and memory, billions of lives extinguished across hundreds of worlds. The Coalition had fought back with everything they had, but they were relentless. They were born for war, evolved for conquest, and they knew nothing of mercy or surrender. His own species, had lost 3 colony worlds in the last decade alone. He still remembered the footage from Prime when the fleet had broken through the orbital defenses. The screaming had lasted for days before the transmissions went silent. Earth was humanity's. The species had only been discovered 30 years ago, and they were still considered newcomers to the galactic community. They had no fleet worth mentioning. Their technology was decades behind the major powers, but they had one thing the Coalition desperately needed. They had numbers. 8 billion humans on Earth alone and billions more scattered across their small cluster of colony worlds. The Coalition Council had debated for months before authorizing this mission. Some argued that humans were too primitive to be useful. Others worried about bringing an unknown species into such a critical conflict. But desperation had won the argument in the end. The Coalition needed bodies to throw against the war machine, and humanity seemed eager to prove itself worthy of galactic membership. Shuttle touched down at the Geneva spaceport on a gray morning in early spring. The air smelled strange to him, thick with organic compounds his translator identified as pollen and vehicle emissions. Humans waited for him at the landing pad, dressed in formal attire that seemed entirely impractical for a species that claimed to have evolved as pursuit predators. Commander Vance stepped forward to greet him. She was tall for a human female with silver hair cut short and eyes the color of storm clouds. She moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent decades in military service. His translator picked up the rows of medals on her chest and identified her as one of the highest-ranking officers in something called United Earth Defense. They exchanged formal greetings according to diplomatic protocol, found human customs strange but not unpleasant. They seemed genuinely interested in making a good impression on their galactic neighbors. The meeting took place in a conference room overlooking the mountains, presented the Coalition's request with all the gravity it deserved. He showed them footage of atrocities. He displayed maps of territory lost and projections of territory that would fall in the coming years. He explained that the Coalition's military forces were stretched to breaking point and that fresh troops were desperately needed. Commander Vance listened without interruption. Her officers took notes on their primitive electronic devices. When finished his presentation, silence filled the room for a long moment. Then Vance asked a question that confused him deeply. "Do you want this war to continue, Ambassador, or do you want it to end?" His translator worked overtime trying to parse the meaning. "I do not understand the distinction, Commander. We want to defeat we want to push them back to their own borders and establish a lasting peace." Vance nodded slowly. "That's what I thought you'd say. You want to fight a war. You want to trade territory and casualties until one side decides the cost is too high. You want a negotiated settlement. Is that not how wars end?" "Sometimes." Vance leaned forward in her chair. "But sometimes wars end a different way. Sometimes they end because one side no longer exists as a functioning entity. Sometimes they end because the enemy's leadership is eliminated so thoroughly that there's no one left to give orders." Felt a chill run through his body despite the comfortable temperature of the room. "What exactly are you proposing, Commander?" "I'm proposing that we don't send you soldiers. Soldiers fight battles. Soldiers take ground and hold positions and die in trenches. That's not what you need. Vance smiled, and there was something in that smile that made one to take a step backward. What you need is someone to end this war, permanently. And you have such people. We have the Omega Division. The name meant nothing to, but the way the human officers shifted in their seats told him it meant something significant to them. Several of them looked uncomfortable. One young lieutenant had gone pale. "What is the Omega Division?" asked. Vance considered the question for a moment before answering. "Humanity has spent 10,000 years fighting itself, Ambassador. We've had wars that killed millions. We've developed weapons that could sterilize entire continents. We've refined the art of killing to a degree that would horrify most species in your coalition." She paused to let that sink in. The Omega Division represents the pinnacle of that refinement. They're not soldiers in any traditional sense. They don't fight fair. They don't follow rules of engagement. They don't believe in honorable combat. Vance's voice dropped lower. They believe in winning, completely and permanently, by whatever means necessary. His translator struggled with some of the concepts, but the meaning was clear enough. "You're talking about assassins, saboteurs, terrorists." "We prefer the term executioners." Vance stood and walked to the window. "They have warlords who command their fleets. Kill the warlords and the fleets fall into chaos. They have supply lines that feed their war machine. Destroy those lines and the machine grinds to a halt. They have a supreme overlord who holds their empire together through force of will. Remove that overlord and the empire tears itself apart. The coalition would never approve of such tactics. They violate every principle of civilized warfare. Then the coalition will continue losing." Vance turned back to face him. "How many more species need to die before your principles become flexible, Ambassador? How many more worlds need to burn?" Had no answer for that. He returned to the coalition with humanity's offer. The council debated for 3 days before desperation once again won the argument. They accepted the human proposal with deep reservations and deeper fears. 2 weeks later, a single human vessel departed Earth carrying 47 members of the Omega Division. They were heading toward the front lines of a war that had consumed civilizations. The galaxy had asked for soldiers. Humanity had sent something else entirely. The coalition flagship Eternal Vigilance was the largest warship ever constructed by the allied species. It stretched nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern and carried enough firepower to glass a small moon. 12,000 crew members called it home, and it had served as the mobile headquarters of the coalition military for the past 20 years. General A stood on the observation deck and watched the human transport approach. The commander towered over most species at nearly 3 meters tall. His exoskeleton was the deep purple of a veteran warrior from dozens of battles against the. He had commanded coalition forces for 15 years and had never lost faith that victory was possible. Until now. "One ship," he said to his adjutant. "They send us one ship. The humans claim it contains their entire contribution to the war effort, General." 47 soldiers. A's mandibles clicked in what passed for bitter laughter among his kind. "I lose more than that in a single skirmish. This is an insult." The transport docked without ceremony. I had assembled a formal honor guard to receive the human contingent, more out of diplomatic necessity than any real respect. The coalition needed humanity's goodwill, even if their military contribution was laughable. The airlock opened, and the humans emerged. I had studied the species extensively in preparation for this meeting. He knew they were endurance predators who had evolved on a high-gravity death world. He knew they were capable of remarkable physical feats and could survive injuries that would kill most galactic species. He had expected warriors in the mold of his own people, proud and aggressive and eager for battle. These humans were something different. They moved quietly, almost silently despite the metal deck plates beneath their feet. Their eyes swept the hangar bay in patterns that are recognized as tactical assessment. They were cataloging exits, counting guards, measuring distances. They were not looking at the honor guard with respect or curiosity. They were looking at them like targets. The human leader stepped forward. He was average height for his species, with short brown hair going gray at the temples. His face was unremarkable except for his eyes. Those eyes held something cold and patient, something that had seen terrible things and done worse. "General, the human said. "I'm Captain Daniel Briggs, commanding officer of the Omega Division. Thank you for receiving us." Towered over the human, but somehow felt no advantage from his greater size. "Captain Briggs, I must confess my disappointment at the size of your force. The Coalition requested soldiers. We expected thousands." "You don't need thousands, General. You need us. 47 humans against an empire of 300 star systems." Briggs smiled slightly. 47 is more than enough. If we do our job correctly, you won't need soldiers at all. The war will simply end. A woman stepped up beside Briggs. She was smaller than him, with dark hair pulled back tight and the same cold assessment in her eyes. "Lieutenant Maria Santos, tactical specialist. If I may, General, I'd like to present our operational analysis." Agreed, more out of curiosity than expectation. He led the humans to the flagship Strategic Command Center, where the Coalition's senior officers had assembled. Representatives from 8 species filled the chamber, each one a veteran of the long war against the. Santos activated the holographic display and began her presentation. She spoke in simple, direct terms that required no translation. "The command structure is hierarchical and rigid. 7 warlords control different sectors of their territory, each commanding their own fleets and armies. Above them sits Supreme Overlord Han, who maintains control through a combination of religious authority and raw military power." The display showed images of each warlord, along with detailed information about their forces, territories, and personal habits. "Kill the overlord and the warlords will fight each other for succession. Kill the warlords and the entire command structure collapses. Without central coordination, the war machine becomes 7 smaller machines working at cross purposes." Admiral of the spoke up. Her species resembled Earth dolphins who had evolved for land, and her voice carried the musical quality common to her kind. "You propose assassination, targeted killing of enemy leadership." "Yes." The chamber erupted in protests. Listened as species after species condemned the human proposal. Such tactics were dishonorable. They violated the accepted rules of warfare. They were the methods of cowards and criminals, not legitimate military forces. Briggs waited until the shouting died down before he spoke. "How long have you been fighting this war, General?" 60 years. "How many soldiers have you lost?" "Billions across all species." "How many civilian casualties?" A's mandibles went still. "We do not keep precise counts. The number is too large." "Hundreds of billions then, perhaps trillions." Briggs looked around the chamber at each officer in turn. "You have fought your honorable war for 60 years. You have followed your noble rules. And what do you have to show for it? 12 species erased from existence. Hundreds of worlds reduced to ash. An enemy that grows stronger while you grow weaker." Silence filled the chamber. "We are offering you victory. Not in another 60 years, but in months. Not through glorious battles, but through precise, surgical elimination of the enemy's ability to wage war." Briggs paused. "The only question is whether your principles are more important than survival." Admiral spoke again, her voice subdued. "Even if we approved such tactics, they are not vulnerable to assassination. Their warlords are protected by armies. Their overlord commands from a fortress world. No strike team could reach them." Lieutenant Santos smiled, and it was not a comforting expression. "With respect, Admiral, that's where you're wrong. No one is unreachable. No fortress is impenetrable. You just need to know how to look for weaknesses. And you know how to find these weaknesses. Finding weaknesses is what we do. Santos pulled up new images on the display. Warlord Os, for example, the Butcher of Prime. He commands the Eastern Front from an orbital fortress protected by 3 battle fleets and the most advanced shields in the Dominion. Impenetrable, Os said. His fortress receives supply shipments every 3 days. Waste processing vessels remove biological matter twice weekly. Security protocols for these vessels are minimal because they're considered too mundane to matter. Santos highlighted a small transport ship in the display. No one inspects garbage ships, General. Everyone assumes they're beneath notice. I stared at the image for a long moment. Then he began to laugh, a deep clicking sound that echoed through the chamber. You would ride garbage into an enemy fortress. We would ride anything that gets us where we need to go, Briggs said. Honor is a luxury, General. Survival is a necessity. We stopped believing in fair fights a very long time ago. The debate continued for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Desperation had brought the coalition to this point, and desperation would push them further still. The Omega Division received authorization for their first operation. The galaxy was about to learn what humans really meant by warfare. Warlord Os had earned his title through decades of systematic brutality. The Butcher of Prime had personally overseen the extermination of 2 coalition species and had reduced 17 worlds to radioactive wastelands. He commanded the Eastern Front from an orbital fortress called the Crimson Fang, a massive structure bristling with weapons and surrounded by 3 battle fleets. Coalition intelligence had attempted to penetrate the Crimson Fang 14 times over the past 30 years. Every attempt had ended in failure. The fortress was considered the most secure installation in space, protected by layers of shields, sensors, and elite guards who answered only to the warlord himself. Captain Daniel Briggs studied the intelligence reports in his quarters aboard the Coalition flagship. Lieutenant Santos sat across from him, marking potential entry points on a holographic map. Specialist Henry Cole leaned against the wall, cleaning his fingernails with a small knife. The Coalition wants to provide support, Santos said. Diversionary attacks, transport ships, backup extraction teams. Decline everything, Briggs replied. More people means more complications. We go in quiet and we come out quiet. Cole looked up from his knife. 12 hours to get in, eliminate the target and get out. That's what you told the general. That's what I told him. You think we can actually do it? Briggs smiled slightly. I think we're about to find out. The operation began 3 days later when a supply convoy passed through a remote sector on its way to the Crimson Fang. The convoy consisted of 15 cargo vessels carrying everything from ammunition to food supplies to replacement parts for the fortress's life support systems. One of those vessels was a waste processing transport scheduled to remove biological refuse from the fortress. No one noticed when the waste transport experienced a minor malfunction and dropped out of formation for emergency repairs. No one noticed when it rejoined the convoy 6 hours later with a slightly different crew complement. They did not concern themselves with the creatures who handled their garbage. Specialist Cole led the infiltration team. 8 humans hidden in modified waste containers, breathing recycled air and communicating through encrypted burst transmissions. The containers were designed to fool sensors while remaining comfortable enough for extended occupation. The team had trained for this exact scenario dozens of times in simulation. The real thing was always different from simulation. The waste transport approached the Crimson Fang without incident. Security protocols required a standard scan of all incoming vessels, but waste transports received only cursory attention. The scan passed over them without detecting anything unusual. Cole felt the slight vibration as the transport docked with the fortress. The containers were offloaded by automated systems and deposited in a processing facility deep within the station's lower levels. The team waited until the facility's work cycle ended, and the area fell silent before emerging from their hiding places. 8 humans stood in the bowels of an enemy fortress, surrounded by millions of hostile soldiers, with nothing but their skills and their weapons to keep them alive. Cole activated his communicator. Infiltration successful, beginning Phase 2. The team split into 3 groups as planned. Cole took 2 operators toward the communications hub. Sergeant Griffin led 2 more toward the sensor control center. Briggs took the remaining pair and began moving toward the warlord's private quarters. The Crimson Fang was enormous, a maze of corridors and chambers that would have been impossible to navigate without the intelligence provided by Coalition sources. Even with that intelligence, the team moved carefully, avoiding patrols and security checkpoints through a combination of timing and patience. Cole reached the communications hub first. 2 technicians monitored the station's external and internal communications from a room filled with displays and control panels. They never saw Cole enter. They never felt the needles that delivered a fast-acting paralytic agent to their nervous systems. They simply stopped moving, and Cole's team took their places at the controls. The communications hub went dark. To anyone outside the fortress, it would appear as a minor technical glitch. Inside the fortress, it meant that no alarm could be transmitted beyond the station's walls. Griffin's team reached the sensor control center and repeated the process. The fortress's internal sensors began feeding false data to the security systems, showing empty corridors where humans were moving and normal operations where chaos was about to erupt. Briggs moved through the upper levels of the fortress like a ghost. The warlord's quarters occupied the highest point of the station, accessible only through a series of security checkpoints staffed by elite guards. Each checkpoint fell to the same combination of patience and precision that had brought them this far. The final door was ornate, decorated with the skulls of fallen enemies and the banners of conquered worlds. Briggs studied it for a moment before nodding to his teammates. They placed shaped charges at precise points along the frame. The door opened silently. Warlord Os was sleeping. The Butcher of Prime, the monster who had ordered the deaths of billions, lay in his private chamber surrounded by luxury and trophies of his conquests. He looked almost peaceful in his rest. Briggs approached the bed without sound. He looked down at the warlord for a long moment, considering the creature who had caused so much suffering. Then he drew his sidearm, placed it against the warlord's skull, and fired a single shot. The sound was barely a whisper thanks to the suppressor. The warlord died without waking, without knowing that his executioner had come for him. "Target eliminated," Briggs said into his communicator. "Begin extraction." The team threw the same route they had used to enter. The bodies they had left behind were hidden, the evidence of their presence erased. The communications hub came back online showing normal operations. The sensors returned to standard function. By the time they discovered their warlord's body, the waste transport was already gone, disappeared into the vastness of space with its human cargo safely hidden once more. The Eastern Front collapsed within a week. Without Os to maintain order, his subordinate commanders turned on each other. Ancient rivalries that had been suppressed by fear resurfaced with deadly intensity. 3 major fleet engagements occurred between forces, each one weakening the Dominion's military strength. Coalition forces advanced into territory that had been contested for decades, meeting only scattered resistance from an enemy too busy fighting itself to present a unified defense. General As stared at the tactical display in disbelief. One single death, and the entire front collapses. Briggs stood beside him, his face as calm as ever. "That's what happens when you remove a keystone. The whole structure falls. This is not how war is supposed to work." No, General, this is exactly how war works. You've just been doing it the hard way for 60 years. A turn to face the human. How many more can you eliminate? All of them. Briggs pulled up a new display showing the remaining warlords and the Supreme Overlord himself. Every single one. And when we're done, the Dominion will no longer exist as a functioning entity. The general looked at the display for a long time. Then he gave the order to proceed. The Omega Division began planning their next 6 operations. The galaxy had never seen anything like this, and they had no idea what was coming for them. The death of Warlord Os sent shockwaves through the Dominion. For the first time in their long history of conquest, a leader had been struck down not in glorious battle, but in the silence of his own chambers. The Butcher of Prime had been killed like prey, not like the predator he believed himself to be. The remaining warlords increased their security. They surrounded themselves with guards. They moved between secure locations on randomized schedules. They trusted no one and suspected everyone. None of it mattered. Warlorda died 3 weeks after Os. She commanded the Southern Fleet from a mobile command ship that changed position every 12 hours. Her personal security detail numbered over 1,000 elite soldiers. Her ship's navigation systems were locked behind 17 layers of encryption that only she could access. Sergeant Griffin cracked those encryption layers in 6 hours. The navigation update that sent A's command ship directly into the heart of a dying star appeared completely legitimate. The warlord had just enough time to realize something was wrong before her vessel was reduced to plasma. The Dominion called it a terrible accident. The Coalition knew better. Warlord Eth was next. He was perhaps the most paranoid of the remaining commanders, sleeping in a different location every night and tasting all his food for poison. He had survived 3 assassination attempts before the Omega Division arrived and considered himself invincible. Lieutenant Santos destroyed him without ever getting close. The evidence appeared gradually over the course of 2 weeks. Communications intercepts suggesting secret negotiations with the Coalition, financial records showing payments to enemy agents, testimony from captured spies identifying Eth as their handler, all of it fabricated with such precision that it was indistinguishable from the real thing. Eth was executed by his own guards on the orders of Supreme Overlord Han. By the time investigators discovered the evidence was false, 2 more warlords had died in the resulting paranoia. Each one suspected the others of treachery. Each one struck first to avoid being struck. The Omega Division had killed 1 warlord and let the kill 4 more for them. Captain Briggs watched the intelligence reports with something approaching satisfaction. They're doing our job for us now. Every death increases the suspicion. Every suspicion leads to more deaths. It's elegant, Cole admitted. Horrifying but elegant. War is always horrifying. We're just making it shorter. The Coalition advanced on every front. Territory that had been held by them for decades fell in days. Fleet engagements that would have cost thousands of Coalition lives were won with minimal casualties because the enemy was too busy fighting itself to present organized resistance. General began to believe that victory was actually possible. After 60 years of grinding attrition, the end was finally in sight. But the Supreme Overlord remained. Han had ruled the Dominion for over a century. He was ancient by standards, a creature of immense size and legendary brutality who had clawed his way to power over the bodies of his rivals. His was a fortress planet surrounded by the largest fleet in the Dominion. His palace was buried deep beneath the surface, protected by shields that could withstand orbital bombardment. He was, according to every analysis the Coalition possessed, completely untouchable. Sergeant Griffin disagreed. This defensive grid is automated, she explained to the assembled team. 12 orbital platforms linked to a central control system. The system is designed to identify and destroy any hostile vessel that enters the inner defense perimeter, which makes attacking impossible, I said. Attacking is impossible. Reprogramming is not. Griffin pulled up technical schematics on the display. The control system uses quantum-encrypted communication protocols that are theoretically unbreakable, but the maintenance access points use standard encryption that hasn't been updated in 30 years. You can access the maintenance systems. Already have. Took about 4 hours. Griffin smiled without warmth. The defensive grid will recognize ships as enemies starting in approximately 6 hours. The resulting friendly fire incident destroyed a quarter of the home fleet. Orbital platforms opened fire on their own vessels without warning, targeting anything that matched energy signatures. The chaos lasted for nearly a day before technicians managed to shut down the compromised systems. By then, the damage was catastrophic. Supreme Overlord had demanded a meeting with the human commander. He transmitted the request on an open channel, making his challenge public. He wanted to understand what kind of creatures could fight this way. He wanted to see the face of his enemy before he destroyed them. Briggs accepted. They met on a dead moon in an abandoned star system, neutral ground chosen by neither side. The Overlord arrived with a ceremonial guard of 200 warriors. Briggs arrived alone. Han was massive, nearly 4 meters of armored muscle and natural bone plating. His claws could shred steel and his jaws could crush stone. He had killed thousands of enemies in personal combat and wore their bones as trophies on his armor. Briggs stood before him without any visible fear. "You are smaller than I expected," the Overlord rumbled. His voice was deep enough to vibrate in the chest. "Weaker. Your species has no natural weapons, no armor, no venom. How have you done what entire fleets could not accomplish? We don't fight the way you expect us to fight. You fight without honor. You strike from shadows like vermin. You poison and deceive and murder." "Yes." The simple admission seemed to confuse the Overlord. "You admit this freely. You feel no shame." "Why would I feel shame? I'm winning." Han growled low in his throat. "You have killed my warlords. You have turned my empire against itself. You have done more damage in months than the Coalition accomplished in decades. But you cannot kill me. I am beyond your reach. My world is a fortress. My guards are legion. You cannot touch me." Briggs looked up at the massive creature without expression. "You know what the interesting thing about this meeting is? You didn't ask for negotiations. You didn't ask for surrender terms. You asked to see my face. I wish to understand my enemy before I destroy them." "No," Briggs shook his head slowly. "You asked for this meeting because you're afraid. For the first time in your very long life, you don't understand what's happening. You don't know how we killed your warlords. You don't know how we turned your defenses against you. You don't know what we're going to do next." The Overlord's claws flexed, but he made no move to attack. The human was right, and they both knew it. "What are you?" Han demanded. "What kind of creatures fight this way?" "We're what happens when a species spends 10,000 years killing each other. We've had wars that make your conquest look like minor skirmishes. We've developed weapons that could sterilize planets, and then we developed ways to survive those weapons, and then we developed worse ones." Briggs paused. "You perfected conquest. You're very good at destroying civilizations, but we perfected something else." "What?" "We perfected ending those who conquer. We perfected breaking empires from the inside. We perfected making monsters afraid." Briggs turned to leave. "Enjoy your fortress, Overlord. It won't protect you forever." He walked away without looking back. Han watched him go, and for the first time in a century, the ruler of the Dominion felt something he barely recognized. He felt fear. The war ended not with a final battle, but with a broadcast. Lieutenant Santos had spent months gathering the evidence. Every atrocity they had committed across their centuries of expansion. Every world burned. every species exterminated, every civilian slaughtered for the crime of existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The footage was horrifying even to humans who had seen their share of warfare. But that wasn't the broadcast that broke the Dominion. The second broadcast was something different. It contained the locations of hidden bunkers scattered across space, emergency shelters constructed in secret by the ruling class over generations, bunkers stocked with food and medicine and luxury goods while the general population suffered under rationing, bunkers designed to protect the elite while their empire burned. The broadcast went everywhere, every world, every colony, every outpost and station and ship. The common soldiers learned that their leaders had been preparing to abandon them. The workers learned that the resources they had sacrificed for the war effort had been hoarded by the powerful. The faithful learned that the divine right of the overlord was nothing but a convenient lie. Captain Briggs watched the results from the bridge of the Coalition flagship. Specialist Cole stood beside him, monitoring communications across space. "Riots on Prime," Cole reported. "The population is storming government facilities. Military units are defecting to join the uprising." Other worlds. Same story everywhere. The outer colonies declared independence 3 hours ago. The core worlds are tearing themselves apart. Cole shook his head in something like amazement. "We didn't even have to kill the Overlord. His own people are going to do it for us." Briggs nodded slowly. "That was always the plan. Assassination only creates martyrs. Revolution creates change." The Dominion collapsed over the following weeks, not from external pressure but from internal fury. Revolutions erupted on 100 worlds as the common population turned against the elite who had lied to them for so long. Warlords were dragged from their fortresses and executed by their own soldiers. The military fractured into dozens of competing factions, each one more interested in settling old scores than continuing the war. Supreme Overlord Han died in his underground palace when his own guards opened the doors to the mob outside. The creature who had ruled through fear for a century learned in his final moments that fear cuts both ways. When the people stopped being afraid, the power disappeared. The Coalition watched in stunned silence as their ancient enemy destroyed itself. 3 months later, Captain Briggs stood before the Coalition Council. The same chamber that had debated for days about whether to accept humanity's offer now welcomed him as the architect of their victory. Representatives from 12 species filled the seats, each one looking at him with expressions that mixed gratitude with something else. Ambassador spoke first. "Captain Briggs, on behalf of the Galactic Coalition, I extend our deepest thanks for your contribution to the war effort. The Dominion is no more. The threat that haunted our civilizations for generations has been eliminated." "You're welcome, Ambassador." However, paused, choosing his words carefully. "There are concerns among the council members, concerns about the methods employed by your Omega Division." "I expected as much." General A stood from his seat. "You won the war, Captain. No one disputes that, but the way you won it troubles us deeply. Assassination, sabotage, psychological manipulation. These are not the tactics of civilized warfare. They're the tactics of effective warfare." "Effective for you, effective against the—" A's mandibles clicked nervously. "But what happens when these tactics are used against us? What happens when humanity decides that the Coalition is standing in the way of something you want?" The chamber fell silent. This was the question that had been lurking beneath the surface since the first warlord fell. Humanity had proven itself capable of destroying an empire. What would stop them from destroying another? Briggs looked around the chamber at each delegate in turn. "General, Ambassador, members of the Council, I understand your concerns. I would be worried too if I were in your position." He walked to the center of the chamber, where all eyes could see him clearly. "Humanity is not a threat to the Coalition. We came to your aid because you asked for help, and we will leave as peacefully as we arrived. The Omega Division will return to Earth, and we will continue our lives as we did before." "How can we trust that?" asked. "You can't. Trust requires time and proof, and we haven't earned that yet." Briggs spread his hands. "But consider this. We could have used these tactics to conquer instead of liberate. We could have made ourselves the new overlords of space. We chose not to." "Why?" "Because that's not who we are. We're not conquerors. We're not empire builders." Briggs paused. "We're survivors. We do what's necessary to protect ourselves and our allies, and then we go home." Admiral spoke from her seat. "Your species frightens us, Captain. I say this without shame. We have seen what you are capable of, and it frightens us." "Good." Briggs met her eyes without flinching. "Fear keeps people careful. It makes them think before acting. Maybe the next time someone considers threatening the coalition, they'll remember what happened to thee and choose a different path." He turned toward the exit, but stopped before reaching the doors. "Remember something, all of you. Humanity didn't ask to join your war. You came to us. You asked for soldiers because you were losing, because your principles and your honorable tactics were leading you toward extinction. We gave you victory." He looked back at the council one final time. "The next time you think about making enemies of Earth, remember this conversation. Remember what we did to the... Remember that we didn't use our full capabilities, that we held back because you were our allies." His voice dropped lower. "You have seen what 47 humans can accomplish. Earth has 8 billion more." The doors closed behind him. The coalition sat in silence for a long time after his departure. Finally, Ambassador spoke. "We asked for soldiers. We had no idea what we were asking for." General nodded slowly. "No, we did not. And I find myself grateful that we asked as allies rather than as enemies." The Omega Division departed Coalition space 3 days later. Their single transport ship carried 47 humans back to a small blue world on the edge of explored space. They left behind a galaxy forever changed by their presence. The war was over. They were gone. The coalition would rebuild and expand into territory that had been closed to them for centuries. And humanity would watch from the shadows, ready to act if needed again. The galaxy had asked for soldiers. Humanity had sent their executioners instead. And the stars would never forget the lesson they had learned. Some species fight wars, humans end them.